Elise here with Andrew's new novel, Forever is the Soul. I am so proud of him for writing this story because I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure that you'll agree if you decide to read it too. So one of the things that I watched Andrew obsess over was the way he titled each of the chapters. The actual title itself came to him pretty quickly, but then he wanted to write subheaders that would reflect the underlying message within each chapter. So I watched him read and reread each chapter before these subheads would just appear to him. And I didn't understand his obsession over these subheads until a number of them began to come together, and I realized they were actually telling a parallel story. So over the next 22 weeks, as a Sunday morning post, I'm going to share a video of Andrew talking about each of the chapter heads in Forever is the Soul. No need for a spoiler alert. He's not going to tell you the storyline or give anything away that would ruin reading the book. What he is going to do is just tell about the philosophy that motivated him to write each of the chapters. So to all of our valued friends, family, and colleagues, if you enjoyed this video, please go to the Forever is the Soul Facebook page and like, share, and follow it to make sure that you'll receive our Sunday morning video blog. So here we go with chapter 1. Enjoy!
Hello, thank you for coming along with me on this Forever is the Soul journey. For me, it's been probably the most exciting thing I've ever done, but yet at the same time the most demanding thing that I've ever done. There was a trick that presented itself to me at the very beginning of the story, and that trick was that quickly I understood that the narrative was going to come through a disincarnate soul. I knew I wanted to write a story about the evolution of humanity, the evolution of the soul, which to me kind of parallels. There's a shared experience, if you will, that we have, I believe, taking place within our consciousness. And in order for me to write Forever is the Soul, I needed to really open up my right hemisphere, which I sense is intuitive and creative. And I needed to go to a place inside myself where I kind of died without dying in order to conceptualize the narrative of what ego that's in this process of transition between the physical plane and the spiritual plane, what's happening to this ego, what's it experiencing. It no longer has the biochemical reactions of a physiological structure, it's just energy. So what's going on in that energy field that would make an interesting story? So what I had to do intellectually is I had to really imagine what the feeling was like. And it was interesting because I could tell where some days I would really get some neat stuff that was very abstract, even foreign to me. And then I'd have to analyze it and make it make sense. And I think where I got to, and I think what the representation of time is in this opening chapter, when death comes, sounds ominous, but death in that context is really a rebirth. It's the death of the ego, or the beginning of the death of the ego into a process of assimilation where consciousness in essence expands out of the individual constructs of what Dennis was into a much bigger version, which leads me to reincarnation and the evolution of the soul. I don't know why, but even as a child, my preoccupation with life and then consequently death was apparent. And most of what drew me, what fascinated me, even by the time I was 12, 13, 14, was what is life, what is death, what does this mean? So I guess in a way I'd always been a seeker. And even by my late teens, I had an English teacher that said, "You're a really good writer." I couldn't spell, I couldn't write. Thank God for word check, because I never could have written a book without it. But I got to a point with Forever where my perspective started to change. I began to see myself as just being a minute aspect of the totality of who I am. And then I started to think about things like, well, if I'm just a minute aspect of the totality of what I am, well, then I'm perceiving that I am me, but there is something else. And these thoughts weren't necessarily foreign to me. They had been repetitive patterns that I had experienced throughout most of my life. This kind of recognition that there was some sort of duality. There was this humanness that I was, but there was something else there. As a child, I think we all get that line. It's sort of a standard line. Oh, it's just your imagination. But then I would think about things like imagination, and I would go, well, what aspect of our development as a species didn't come from our imagination? I'm sure our forefathers a long time ago watched fire and then decided that maybe we should probably figure out how to use fire. And on it goes, from architecture to art to religions to social cultures to governments to economic situations. We just kept evolving lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So when I say lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, it evokes within me a feeling of a continuance that's beyond just our little minute aspects, our little egocentricities that are really biological reactors taking place within our physiology based on conditioning and patterning, and mom said and dad said and the Pope said and green is green and blue is blue. These are all just algorithms that are transposed into the brain by circumstances that we have little control over. Certainly within our first 7 or 8 years of life, it's just transposing into us, creating the belief structures and the hardwired patterns that become our consciousness. So working on Forever is the Soul almost mandated that I forfeit a lot of what I think and go to more of a feeling center, which I found interesting. On the days when I could really get into a feeling center, I felt incredibly expansive. I felt as though maybe I had been here 10,000 times, and that maybe this moment called Andrew is simply that. It's a moment in the totality of what it is that I am as a human being. More importantly, it's a moment within the totality of the soul that I am as I migrate from one lifetime to another lifetime in order to evolve. And I truly believe we are evolving as a species. Even if you look at the world around us, the turmoil, the stress, the tensions that people are experiencing, cultures are experiencing, religions are experiencing, are all part of the strife that facilitate an evolution. And you look at 100 years and recognize that just a mere 100 years ago, this is just a small, tiny little bit of time. We've gone from horse and buggies to things on Mars. That's a pretty rapid evolution. So to me, something's happened to our species, and we're kind of on the precipice of a massive change that can take us into perhaps a world of peace and balance and equitabilities. So here we are, and here I am writing this book at a time in my life where I knew I had to slow down. Some physiological things were going on in me that made me kind of go, wow, I can't do all these things anymore, but I can write. And I'd always wanted to write. I actually have always written. I started to write journals when I was 13, 14, just capturing pictures of what was going on, what I was feeling in adolescence and young teens and so on. So I had a huge repertoire of things to reference when I started to think about writing Forever is the Soul. And I don't think that, interestingly enough, staying with time for a moment, that's kind of funny, staying with time for a moment. Things come to us. If you look at your own life, you can recognize that maybe the best laid strategy didn't work out, but something else did. See, we're always being influenced. I believe we're always being influenced by some force that evokes within us a response, biological in nature, which evokes a thought, which takes us in different directions. Well, for me, I became almost obsessed with this book when I started to write it. It was like, no, I'm going to write this book about what happens to you when you die. How cool is that? And off I went. But I learned a lot writing that book. And I think what it helped me do was assimilate a great many philosophies that I had read over the years. I've been somewhat disciplined in meditation pursuits, and I've read a lot about different religions, kind of trying to figure out who's saying what and how is this coming about and what does it ultimately mean. One of the battles that I had most writing the book was, oddly, time. I recognized my algorithms, like most of us in our society and culture, time compresses us. We become very compressed within time. I'll write this book in 6 months, I said to Elise, and 4 years it took me to write this book. It's like, okay, so I was wrong. The fact is the book manifested, which is cool, but the battles that I had were not with the intellectual process or the creative process. It was the expectation that I put on myself, because so many of my algorithms, my earliest childhood programs, told me to live within these time patterns that we all seem to rush about trying to live within. So when I finished the first chapter, and I knew the title, When Death Comes, and I know that sounds a little ominous, but it's not meant to. It's kind of like it's a good thing. And if you read the book, you'll quickly understand that, from the perspective that the narrator evolves very rapidly into the book, the narrator is introduced through this death process. Moving on to this sub-statement that I, as Elise said, I obsessed over, and in some ways I did. I have to acknowledge I need to ground this somehow. So, 60 seconds, we get this minute, and then we get this we get the second, and then we get this other second at the end, and we get this 58 seconds. To me, it's almost a representation of, as I said before, Andrew is just a small aspect of the totality of what it is to be Andrew. And Andrew is driven by biological algorithms that evoke into me a consciousness or an awareness of the fact that I'm even here being present. But time in that context, I don't know how much time I have. I know that at times I was quite ill writing the book, and I didn't really know whether I was living or dying. It was like I was in this sort of animated state of being where my physiology wasn't all that supportive, but my mind wanted to be more free, which I think helped me go off into imagination and conceptualization. What does death feel like? What does an afterlife feel like? What can I see from that perspective? Can I see forward in time? Can I see backwards in time? And I think to some degree, at least, I'm going to say the story's fictional. I believe it to be true, but it's fictional. And I think that as it evolved, and these little statements evolved at the beginning of each chapter, I recognized that they were offering me an insight into what it is I'd either written or was about to write. Sometimes the statements would become apparent to me prior to the writing of a chapter, almost like an indicator. That's where you got to go. And then sometimes they come afterwards, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where these come from and how they work, but they became sort of the impetus of what I wanted to be able to say and how I wanted to be able to say it, and keep it an entertaining story. So I think if I can say anything about time in that regards, and it's an interesting contemplation, take it as a moment-to-moment thing, and take those moments, at least a few every day, where you do offer yourself the freedom and the liberty to integrate, just to go into yourself and go, okay, I've got 60 seconds here. 1 second took my consciousness that second to process the fact that I've got another 59 seconds, and then the last second is going to be a sort of a summary, but you got this 58 seconds to breathe, to let yourself pontificate and wonder about something beyond the normal function and rhythm of your life, which is being influenced, as we all know, by time. So I just thought I'd share with you those thoughts on time, and hopefully you are going to enjoy this next 23 weeks as we disseminate some of the meaning to the chapter headings and the subheadings of Forever is the Soul. Thanks for coming along.